professor at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, and I'm presenting on behalf of myself and my co-author on this project, Rick Caceres, who is a PhD candidate, where I did my PhD at the University of Albany. So we have been asked to write and talk about the role that public administration research and theory can play in informing intelligence studies and, as we think, very much practice. So I've probably got the easiest task, given that intelligence agencies, largely the ones that we're most interested in, are public sector organizations, and they're embedded in many of the same systems and issues and so forth that their overt counterparts are. And better people have, made good arguments for the importance of bringing public administration more expressly into intelligence studies and bringing intelligence studies more pointedly into public administration. And we think, in addition to better understanding, maybe especially for managers and reformers, their own intelligence contexts, better understanding of the various ways that organizations function and are studied can help people like intelligence analysts understand the entities that and the individuals even that they're looking at. And given the covert nature of most intelligence functions and agencies, this can bring sort of a new and better dimension than currently exists in public administration on intelligence studies. And I think it was Philip Davies whose was an editor of a special issue of Public Policy and Administration, and called Public Administration the missing dimension of the missing dimension, and collected a series of articles that in various ways looked at organizational facets of public intelligence agencies. And there are other good steps, good case studies, good descriptive studies that are out there. And one of the things that that we argue in the paper, and I'll discuss a little bit here, is how sort of next steps beyond that can be taken. And I think one of our assessments, not of all the works that look squarely at public administration of intelligence agencies, but many of them is looking at organizational facets is good and it's important, but there are these stores and streams of public administration research that could invigorate sort of the research programs that are pursued, make more nuanced the studies that are done that have not necessarily been looked to as hard as they can. So we think that doing sort of the descriptive case study is very important. But that's not the full story, and that there are other specific facets and theoretical, empirical areas that could be, brought to bear. And I think that Dr. Pythian noted Damien's study, and another similar study by Miriam Vera-Harkis had found that organizational analysis in intelligence studies is overall still quite a small facet of that literature. And our read is that probably a preponderance of those articles deal with things like collaboration, things like information sharing breakdown, things like building more integrated communities or organizations, and that is important, very much so, but there are other facets, again, that I'll talk a little bit about that don't seem to be pervading, that very much could, for example, putting more squarely the study of things like job satisfaction into the literature. There are significant numbers of works in the PA field that find that is a more important determinant of organizational performance and outcomes than almost anything else. And that is, to our knowledge, something that hasn't been looked at as closely as it could be. I think even, there was a recent article by John Gentry that made the point that even simply the management intelligence analyst as a square focus hasn't really been given a lot of attention by scholars, or the role of managers by reformers, and they do have many important functions. obviously, and they can learn to do their jobs better by being probably more apprised of this literature, and we can understand their role more if we look more closely at them. So, in addition to, there are just, virtually probably, a majority of what is studied in public administration in some form or fashion could be applied to study intelligence organizations. And with, for example, the more recent push on increasing diversity in the intelligence community in the United States by way of the grant program that is funding this colloquium right now, the Intelligence Community Centers for Academic Excellence. There's a significant stream in the public administration research that looks at bureaucratic representation, representativeness, and how organizational practice and performance can be improved and altered by way of greater diversity in representation across a number of different sorts of demographics and characteristics. And we are also not, and they could be out there and we might have missed them, but this seems to not be a lens that has been applied. And something that for a while I've thought particularly is a gap is given the percentage simply in the United States specifically of intelligence budgets that are outsourced or used for contracting purposes. That is another whole area that very much is still grappling with things like what is inherently governmental, and many things in intelligence probably are, and it seems like many of them are being done by private sector actors, and that's an important conversation that the intelligence studies literature can plug into. Intergovernmental management, increasingly with state and local governments becoming involved, in many respects at the beginning under the auspices of the federal government, DOJ and the Department of Homeland Security, but increasingly self-funded, more autonomous, and so forth. And interaction with the larger environment that intelligence agencies are embedded in. So environmental scanning practices for things like internal management, adaptation, decision-making, organizational sense-making, cognitive processes. These are, all areas that could speak, and there is some work in these areas, but could speak more deeply to intelligence studies. So, this is not a new argument. I think we are trying to encourage and ourselves hopefully explore more specific theoretical frames and empirical streams of public administration research that could help sort of carry this forward in a more robust fashion. And I think that one thing that the public administration literature can do is just be more accessible. It's very big. It can be quite daunting. It's fragmented. It's very multifaceted. But as a person with a PhD in public administration and policy, I find myself maybe too often having to read something a couple times and thinking a practitioner is really going to have maybe a difficult time getting their arms around this. So I think making the literature more accessible and digestible is an important step. But one of the things that we propose in the paper is that the intelligence community look to do what it has done in the past, which is to bring in intelligence scholars or other sorts of scholars, ethnographers, sociologists, and so forth, but in a more integrated way and perhaps specific to areas of study and frames in PA, is maybe displace a little bit the work of consultants who do efficiency studies, studies on organizational process and structure, and maybe bring to bear academics more frequently and more systematically, and not just in public administration, but in other fields as well. And we discuss the importance and the possibility, if the intelligence community is to be increasingly open, of doing things like surveys, interviews, participant observation, which I think if you were to sort of track sort of the work in that area, there is an upswing there which suggests more accessibility, and that is really probably also one of the main hang-ups for not more public administrationists looking to that field, looking to do work in this area, because they simply don't have the stores of data as accessible and open as they do in the other whole set of organizations that are more overt. So the real key, in addition to, and there are non-empirical ways, meaning that we should do more original PA, inspired influence studies in intelligence, but we think we can also improve our work just by being more apprised of the big and relevant literatures in the field. But access is something that will actuate better in that next step of research.